Elevating performance, easier said than done. This is the third part in the series, and today we're going to talk all about elevating performance. And I have such a wonderful time doing this and switching it up from telling us your story. It reminded me why we started the podcast and just the engagement and the fun we had going back and forth. But we just scratched the surface with these 3 episodes. We didn't cover it all.
Oh, there's no way you can. We can't even fit, even the ones that we did, you can't fit it all in an hour. So I know that they'll come back up. But I think what's important about this one is we talked first about elevating individuals. We talked next about elevating teams. And this word, elevating performance, which will happen a little bit naturally, but also like there's additional keys in there that can push that performance to the next level. So I think in this one too, we're going to just kind of touch the surface, but there's a couple gems in there.
Yeah, we're going to touch the surface. And what I love about doing this is it's self-improvement for leadership, right? So keep applying, keep giving us feedback, keep applying the principles we're talking about and the different things, and let us know how they're working out. We are getting feedback. Some of that feedback is like, what are you talking about? But then you try it and it works. So I'm really having a good time. This is fun. So enjoy this episode.
Welcome to Grandpa and the Millennial, the podcast for thought-provoking leadership conversations sparked from real-life leadership journeys. I'm here with Anthony, the Grandpa. I'm Natasha, the Millennial, and our mission is to help you, the professional leader or new entrepreneur, effectively influence, inspire, and develop both yourself and those you lead.
In today's episode, we're going to talk about elevating performance. And we're going to touch on 3 key areas. So how you operationalize the processes within your organization, within your teams, so that you can elevate not just the individual's performance, but your team's performance. And then incentivize. You're automatically going to think about what the bonus is or how much money, but it's more than just what you're paying people. So we're going to dive into that a little bit and have a conversation. We're going to take you on a wild ride there. And then culture. Culture is so hard to develop a great culture and keep it. So learning from all kinds of different resources and people and experiences, we're going to share ours and what we think, how you can develop a great culture. And we'd love to hear from you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Grandpa and the Millennial. Natasha, it's great to be back on the air with you. So this is our 3rd conversation in a 3-part series. The first 2, we talked about the individual and elevating the person themselves. The second one, we talked about how you elevate your teams and the culture. And this one, we're going to talk about overall performance. And when we talk about overall performance, again, we could talk for a week on this topic. So we're going to hit a few very key points. And there's going to be some overlap from the first 2 conversations. There's no way to avoid it. But I'm really looking forward to diving into this. This is something you and I have been doing for a long time. I've learned a lot of lessons from a lot of mistakes, but also a lot of successes.
Yeah, I think when I was thinking through the topic, you touched on it, there's some overlap. If you invest in individuals and elevate them by nature, right, whatever the performance will also elevate, same with teams. So when I was thinking about, okay, take that being, it is what it is, right? Work on the individual, work on the team, and you'll have performance results. How do you actually elevate perform? Everyone will perform. Can get the task done. But how do you actually elevate that point of the process?
Yeah, and there's different levels of performance, right? So when you're working with, or different, meeting someone in their journey, right? Meet them where they're at. So there's people that are new to the company, new to the career, they're new to a process. You may have, whether it be entry-level positions or employee-based, then you may have an exempt or supervisor manager base. All of those performances or the key performance indicators are going to be different based on all of those. And if done right, you're going to have a ramp up for those that are coming in new, not just to the company, but new to the position. And then for those areas that are in your leadership teams or your management teams, you may not necessarily have very specific KPIs in cases where you're talking about building culture, building teams. But you do need to be able to have a vision and understand what their growth path is going to look like. So there's a lot to talk about and unpack here and go through.
Yeah, and coming in behind all of that, they can, as I think about individuals and teams, they can understand the vision. You can get them there. You can identify people with potential. These are all things that we've talked about. They can be bought in, they can be motivated, all that good stuff, but then they actually have to do the task. Like, they actually have to execute. And at that point, as you look across what you're doing and elevating the end result, it's everything builds up to it, but you're really working on elevating that last piece of the puzzle, which is the actual performance part.
Yeah. And so if I ask you to think right now, and in your mind's eye, and for those that are listening, a team or an organization that you've worked with, where performance was at its highest. Can you envision that? Can you see it?
Of one that I've experienced myself?
Yeah. Can you think of that team and who was around you?
Yes.
And what emotions does that elicit? Like, I can see the smile instantly.
Yeah.
So what kind of emotions when you think about that high performing team?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And it does make me smile, and it does actually make me feel something, because it in particular was a team that we scaled on a very large scale. It started small, scaled very large. And I feel like I can still feel the passion that we all had for what we were doing. Like, we had very high standards. We had very high goals. We had a lot of individuals that were coming together, new people, all of that, but we were so in it. Like, we were absolutely in it together. And I think that's what makes those are the best, like absolutely the best projects. So I think I would say mostly I just remember the feelings of passion and the struggle and being able to get through it, because we were just so on this, mission to elevate what we were doing before.
Yeah. And I can imagine, and I know some of it, but as you're going through on that mission, it wasn't always easy days.
Oh my gosh, no, more often than not, it was not.
But it elicited such a good emotion. So let's take the reverse of that. Now, can you think of a team or a project that you've worked on where it was the opposite and the passion wasn't there and you weren't being elevated? So, and I can see it come across your face. Did it automatically come into your mind?
You need to be on camera. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the opposite emotions, right? Not that the leaders and what I feel like I was pouring into the team or the project was lacking, but sometimes it doesn't work out, right? It's not always the feel goods. It's not always the performance on the other side that you're hoping for. And I think that elicits more of a disappointment. And when I think about why, which I have sat on for a very long time, I really think it stemmed from a majority of the group being stuck in their ways and not open to change. And so no matter how passionate and excited and all of that you come to the team with, if they're not willing to move, then you probably won't. And that's where, the disappointment and the hardships, I think, come in.
I agree. And the reason I ask, and I hope people that are listening went through this exercise as well, like, there's two different emotions. There's probably a lot more in there, but when you think about the impact we have on people than we have on teams, and now we're going to talk about performance, we want people to look back at their time with us as leaders, and we want them to smile when they think about, I was part of something that was special. And it's a chapter, it's a season, however you look at it. It's not going to last forever. Nothing good does, nor does anything bad. And what we don't want to do, or at least what I don't want to do, is I don't want to be that leader when someone thinks about, I was on this team or I was on this project, how was it? And that look of disappointment comes across someone's face, and they don't have to say anything. And so as we're going through these conversations, I think it's just so incredibly important to remember it's how we make people feel that at the end of the day, that's going to be the most important. And I can argue both sides, and I don't know that it's an argument, but you have to put the processes in place to be as a successful business, but you can do that and make people feel good. It's not one or the other.
Oh, yeah. I'm a huge fan of balance. I think everything has a little bit of give and take, but I think you're right. We actually had this conversation a little bit earlier today, not on the podcast. And as you are talking through that, like, the times will be hard and everything won't turn out how you want it to. And sometimes you'll still end up disappointed, but that can be separated from the people that were doing it or the work and effort that you put in. The outcome, right, like might not be what you're expecting, but there's still appreciation to be had, and you're still leaving those. Everyone walks away feeling something, remembering something on it, hopefully, right, and good or bad. And so it was a good little, you made me reflect there for a minute, and so I think it was good.
That's good.
It was a good point.
So let's walk through it then. Let's see if we can, give some tips and ideas. And as people listen to this 3-part series, hopefully they can step away and start to apply some of this so they can bring some smiles and just create a better working environment, ultimately what we want to do.
Yeah. And you hit on it kind of right before, is just the processes and operationalizing something. So in the past 2 episodes, we've talked about the individual and the team. So we've identified people that have potential. We've given them, where we think they can grow. We've let the team know what the mission is or the vision. We've set the goal. All of that's great. But as I mentioned, now we're at the stage where we have to execute. And so if we want to be successful with that, if we want to elevate, we have to provide some of those tools, some of those ways of standardizing things so that you can scale and share and make sure that everybody across the team is performing in a way that aligns, right? Not everybody is off, doing what they consider is good or great or meeting expectations. I think streamlining some of that is one of the key areas to elevate. Otherwise, people might be doing good work, but it can get out of hand and people are kind of all over the place, and that can just be lost pretty easily.
Yeah, there's a playbook for it. What comes to mind is I watch Bar Rescue from time to time. I also watch Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. And they come in, and I get that it's TV, but there's this process that they come in and they know from start to finish. And whether, if you think of a sales process, you think of running a bar or a restaurant, whatever it is, there are these milestones and these markers along the way that tell you you're going on the right path. And operationalizing it is one of the biggest pieces. So I bring up Bar Rescues because a lot of times he walks in and you have 20 people in there that maybe they're all talented, but they're all doing something different. They're not all doing the same thing. By the end of the show, they're all doing the same thing. And you and I have walked into teams and we've looked and we've like, look, that top performer, why is he so good? And we look at the middle performer, he's doing something different. And the other middle performer, she's doing something different. And there's no consistency. It hasn't been operationalized. Mm-hmm. They're just letting people do what they want. So I think that's one of the foundations, is really starting to document the processes and map it out.
Yeah, finding the things that work and then leaning into it. Like you said, we've had many teams where people ask, like, why is this person so much above others or outperforming, and why is this person not? And those people in the middle, could they get to the next level? So I think looking at some of those ways and finding what's in there to give them. We're very familiar with sales, so the sales script, of course, comes to mind. And not to say that it has to be, I'm a big believer that it doesn't have to be, and dare I say on recording shouldn't be, like word for word scripting, but we give them, in my experience, give them the swim lane so that they can, replicate it. We can go and tell the whole team, hey, here's the 4 kind of key areas, and this is what they mean. This is why it's important. This is what you should be talking about or doing, and let them have a little bit of creativity within that. But there's no way, I think, it's just, maybe not, I shouldn't say no way, but to scale anything and keep consistent, because you won't be able to manage. Like, that's another part, is not just, is it harder for the individuals to function, but if you don't standardize things, what are you tracking?
Yeah, and so when you go through that process and standardizing it, whether it's a script or it's a process flow, what is your process? How do you go through that? How do you ensure that it's going to be successful? And the reason I ask, I can go lock myself in a room. I've been selling for a long time, mm-hmm. and I can come up with a script that I think is incredible, and then just be told how horrible it is. So how do you go about?
Said like a true salesperson, I can come up with the best thing. And by no means would I have, like you said, I would never lock myself in a room and do it myself. There's no way. There's so many just different areas that you need to take into consideration to get input. So for me, if I'm trying to standardize, I'll speak like you walk into a team, right? First is understanding what that process is, like understanding from start to finish, like how does it work? You can usually like to start with the ideal path, and then obviously we know that it doesn't go that way most of the time, so you can kind of figure out the rest. But pull in what are people, ask them what they're doing, sit with them. Big fan of like sitting, shadowing, asking questions, understanding, okay, this is what they're doing, why they're doing it, but this is what we need to do, and then plugging all the pieces in together. So big believer in, if you're going to create a standard process that is going to go across, like it better be a good one, So I think getting information to the best of your ability, getting input from people that are doing it, listening not just to, I keep referencing sales, but not just to the sales agent, right? It has to be the customer. What do customers need, or client or target audience thing? And that helps you be educated enough to then back into a process. But if you just try and whip out a process and then go hand it out, like that's not going to work.
Yeah. And so as I think about this, I'm kind of interviewing you. I'm asking you these questions. So what does that do for the individual? So sitting there and asking them questions, getting their input. We talked about individual performance, but that act alone, what are you doing?
Well, I don't know if I'm doing what you're going to say I'm doing, but a couple of things springs to mind. So one, anytime they are involved in the process, right, there's more buy-in, there's more value. We talked about that in the individual. I think what I've gotten the most out of asking those questions and sitting is that they start to ask themselves questions as well. They'll be like, why do I do it that way? Or I'll ask a question of something that they've been doing for the longest time, and then they'll start to think like, oh, maybe there is different ways to doing it. And so I think the sheer act of conversation and question and the activity of making them think. One thing in this remote environment is, agents are at home or an individual, all they hear is themselves talking every day. And so sometimes you forget that like there's other ways of doing things, right? You only hear yourself. And whereas when we were on the floor, you heard something next to you, and then all of a sudden like, oh, that might actually work better. So I think just involving them makes them question it, makes them feel valued. It makes you build a better process and product because it's actually relevant to who's involved.
Yeah. And when I think you hit it spot on. When you are thinking about anything that you've done in life, and, if you've built it, if you've been part of building it, you are so invested versus someone handing it to you. So not only are you giving value, right? You're learning, they're learning, but the investment that they have in seeing it successful is equal to yours. And that's what's so important to me as a leader, is that this isn't about me coming and telling you what to do. We have to make hard decisions as leaders. You're not going to get past that. But the people that are within our teams, it doesn't matter what the title is. We're walking side by side with them. And if you help me build this, we're both invested. I'm invested in you. You're invested in me. We're both invested in the process. And I think that's so important that you go about that in building out, whether it's your comp plan or you're building out your script or a process that someone has to follow every day. Anytime you can involve your people, you're going to end up with a more invested group, and they're just going to be happier. You're going to see longer tenure, and it's going to equate directly to performance.
Oh yeah. When I think back to that team you asked me about, where we, just did amazing things and had really fantastic results. That was the feeling, as they were in on it, and we were almost, some things we had to start from scratch. Some things already had a process, and we had to pull it back and say, hey, let's review it. Let's redo it. Let's optimize it. So it was from both ends, but being in that journey with them, like, absolutely. And it's a conversation for another day when you have to sometimes walk away from those projects or let it go or pass it on to the next person. And that's when you really realize, like, oh man, I was so invested. You think it, but it's a good thing when it's a little bit hard to walk away.
Yes. And it's one of we've talked about this quite a bit. It's, we get attached to what we do and the teams we're with.
Gosh,
and
I do.
It's part of work. It's part of life. Whether it's professional sports, it's corporate world, whatever it is, you build something you're incredibly proud of. the person that's coming in after you is going to see something different, and they're going to do things a different way, and you have to be good with it. But there's always going to be a piece of your fingerprint's always going to be on some of those amazing teams.
Yeah, absolutely. So action item on that one of operationalizing and standardizing is, document. We've said that as well in the last episode, but start to document some of that out. So one, it's, what you document will be what you've created or come up with all of that input, right? But having a product that you can hand to the next person, the new person that walks in, right? The new agent that needs guidance, the person who wants to understand how your business works, like all of that. Think of that, I think about building it for the people who use it, and then building it for those that are going to, have some type of touch point and wonder where it is. And so I think that's kind of the action, is document it in a way that can be, replicated or passed out or used to inform.
I love it. These are all great points, Natasha. And as we move into the next piece, it's just as critical when we talk about how you create an incentive or how you incentivize your people. And that's not always monetary. Actually, most of the time it's not. But let's talk about incentive and how you incentivize your people.
Yeah, we've talked through some of the other things as far as the vision and the goal and all of that. So your team can, they can understand the vision, understand the goal, but they might at some point maybe lack motivation or maybe not have, they know where they're going, but need little things to keep them going. So I think that's where incentive comes in, is they can understand it and be for it, but the way to make it a little fun and a little exciting and keep them, it's just little things. It's like miles. What is an extra little thing on top that makes them want to continue to perform well and to outperform?
Yeah. And so let's start with the monetary. So even though I want to make sure it's clear, that's not the most important piece. It's a critical piece. Mm-hmm. And understanding what employee is producing, what their incentive should be for, how you should compensate them, is all very important. A lot of times you have HR teams that are there to help you and revenue teams that are to help you. But the most important people that should help you create an incentive plan are the employees themselves. And so as people are listening, they might be saying, well, I already have an incentive plan in place, so it's a little late. It's never too late. We know that you do this on a quarterly basis, semi-annual or annual. You bring them in, you get their input, you take their feedback, and then you implement and institute as much as you can based on that feedback. And that's where I think we've seen the most success.
Yeah, and that by no means is easy. You ask people, how do you want to be incentivized or what? Like I've had people like, oh, pay me more. Or sometimes their expectations are outside of the realm. So of course and you talk through that, right? It's like, okay, well, I would love to do that, but it's not necessarily how it works with everything else. So I think just at least hearing and again, being a part of it will help you build something that makes sense, right? Like what is it? Is it tied to what they want as well as what your actual goal is? Is it aligned with what would be considered successful, right? Like it's interesting. I thought through like contests and things that make it fun, right? Sometimes fun doesn't correlate to production. And so I think there's times for both. Yes, sometimes it is just fun, but I think the best incentives gives them something out of it, and the team and the performance at the end of the day is boosted. So it has to be something that aligns as well.
Yeah, I agree. I've been part of teams, and I'll own it, where I've had a contest every month and production wasn't changing. I was just giving away different prizes and things. Yeah. Everyone was having fun, but it wasn't driving the behaviors I want. So you have to be careful not to associate, like you said, contests with performance. So they have to align. But let's talk about that incentive plan. So how do you bring your teams in? So are you doing it individually? Are you doing it in groups? What does it look like? And how are you facilitating those conversations?
It depends on the structure. So I have, most of the time it's two ways. One is I will go to one of my leaders that is speaking on behalf of their team. So it's almost that leader is taking the feedback. They're the ones that are in the one-on-ones every week with, their person or their agent, and they are taking that feedback. And so they come to me kind of speaking on behalf of the group, and we could talk through, okay, this is what we're thinking. The other way is to get the group involved is, I've had to sit in meetings and sometimes the conversation isn't always fun. It's like, hey, we can only do this much, and tell me how we want to split it up, or what would make. Here's the goal that we're going for. What would be a way to incentivize? And then you get the actual, team or individual. So at every level. So it depends on kind of the layering of it.
Agreed. And one-on-ones always help. Getting to the employee, the agent level, and sitting down. It takes a lot of time, but if you're able to, say, hey, we have 15 minutes or a half hour, love your input, love your ideas, and collecting all of that information. And then as you're having these meetings, I think it's really important in the beginning to set expectations of the way comp works, what the product is, or how the incentive is being looked at, and then what the contribution is from each person. Be surprised when, or maybe not so surprised, but like when I was a young supervisor and started doing this, I had people who thought that, the product we were selling was 10 times more in revenue than we were actually bringing in. And then explaining, what was the cost to get that, 100 leads so you could sell 2. And then how much are you getting paid? And then how much am I getting paid? Just to keep the lights on. So giving that overall and putting it into a package so everybody understands where we're at and what we're going after, you can get alignment. You don't always get perfection. Not everyone's always going to be bought in, but you get a lot closer for sure.
Yeah, I think I've also been in situations where you kind of create some conflict. Like I've had these comp plans, right, where maybe it's, on the monetary side, like we're paying for 2 separate products or something, and then it starts to compete, right? And so then it's almost like sales didn't boost in either. One either took away from the other. So it's complex. And so it's really important to make sure that it makes sense functionally, like for the goal, and then for that it will actually work. Because at the end of the day, like they're in on the comp plan, but what about an incentive or a comp plan or something like that? What about that boosts performance or elevates performance?
Yeah. And so let's talk about also not just the compensation piece, but let's talk about the daily.
Yeah.
So what other type of ways are you because incentive is a big word. It's a broad.
Yeah.
So what other ways are you incentivizing your employees on a daily basis?
Good question. I think, as they're working, if we look at career like development and growth, I have some people that are like, I don't care about a dollar amount. Like that's not what drives me. What incentivizes me or motivates me or gives me a little bit extra is, hearing what value I'm bringing or showcasing me. So if we're working on, who's going to be the next leader of a project or who's going to take the next step, I think some of those are incentivizing as, hey, and that gets to obviously the individuals and potentials, but combining that somehow and giving them, incentivizing them with opportunity. Like, hey, if, you're elevating your performance and you're doing well here, it might result in, an additional, like workload or project or something like that, it depends on the person. Sometimes it works.
Yeah, it absolutely depends on the person, understanding your team. So you're going to have some people who are incentivized, like you said, they want that opportunity and that growth and knowing that. The person sitting right next to them, for whatever, there's a variety of reasons. This might be their destination. They want to do a really good job and they want to be left alone. They want to check all of the boxes. They want to make sure that they're a good performer, but then they may not need to move up in their career or want to move up. So understanding that and what you can bring to each of those individuals is really important. We talk about, or we have employees we talk about all the time, like, oh, I'm going to give them this opportunity. I'm going to put them in front of this group so they can do a presentation. That might work with one person.
Yeah.
Then the next person is like, why would you do this to me? I'm going to quit.
Like that's not a win for me. That's not fun.
Yeah. So finding that balance of when sometimes you have to push them out of their comfort zone. But finding that balance of what actually incentivizes and motivates people, it's a lot of work, but it's incredibly important.
And sometimes it's small. It doesn't have to be some grand gesture. I've literally had agents that they don't come out and say, hey, my incentive is like you giving me kudos or you passing over to my boss good feedback. But if we have like a daily report or a shout out, right, for the week or a monthly MVP, things like that, I think where they get showcased or just said thank you, they don't need, and some people, again, they don't like that. Like, please don't send something to the whole floor about how great I am. But for some people, they're like, that meant so much more to me and gave me more passion for what I was doing and helped me want to do even better the next time, just because we said something appreciative of them and shared it with other people.
Yeah, the more and more we talk, the more and more complex this is. People might be listening and saying, they're all over the place. Like, it's easy, it's hard. But there is a recipe or blue book, so to speak, or a playbook, not a blue book. I'm not buying a
Blueprint,
car. Blueprint,
maybe?
yeah. Ooh, there's a grandpa moment on air. So
Bless your heart.
that's like a grandma statement. But as we go through and think about how we incentivize those individuals, it's everything.
So let me ask you, do you think are incentive and motivation the same thing? Do you look at it or get to the end result? Like, are they correlated or are they separate? I don't even know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And it's a fantastic question. And there's definitely overlap. Again, it's going to come down to the individual. So you want to have an incentive that obviously is rewarding people for what they're doing and what they're bringing in as far as what they're producing. But at the same time, you want to be able to motivate them to get to either the next level or maximize that incentivize, which then comes in the motivation. So when you take that aside, I think that incentive is an important piece, but I've always believed that there's different ways to motivate employees, and there's different ways that employees motivate themselves, and incentive plays a piece, but it's not the complete puzzle. How's that for answering your question and keeping it?
Well, that's what I was thinking is like, so real life example is we might have an employee whose motivation is correlated, like their why, right? They're motivated to come to work and do a good job because they're providing for their family, right? Or they are working towards, saving up for something. And then the incentive, like on top of that is, so it's like providing for their family. Yes, if the incentive is money, that would work in their favor. But that's what I was just thinking is your motivation can be something completely different or separate from just the act of an incentive.
Yeah. And I think for everybody that's listening, each individual is going to have an opinion on this one. This is probably the one that's the most divided because it's going to depend on where you're at in your career, what your perspective. Some people are going to say, that incentive is what motivates me. I want to buy a boat. I want to buy a Ferrari or, a new watch. And then on the flip side, you might be saying, I need that incentive. This is what I've produced and I've been rewarded for. Motivate me in other ways. So it can be all over the place.
It's going to be a good one. If my team is listening, I'm going to hear it. I'm absolutely going to hear it. So what about kind of action items or steps to take for making sure that your incentive aligns with elevating performance?
Yeah, most important is to bring people along on the journey and bring them in and let them be part of that process. So if you want to elevate anybody, include them, hear them, and it can't be lip service. If someone gives you an idea and it's an actionable idea that's beneficial for everybody, use it. And if it's not, circle back and explain why. Say, we took this into consideration and here's the reason why we're unable to do that. So you may not be able to execute on everything, but making sure that they're part of the process, the team, and giving them value, that's going to elevate their performance along with the incentive plan.
Yeah, I think in those conversations, or maybe I know methods like surveying, right? Like just making sure that they're feeling heard and that it's aligned. And then as you work through those, I'm a thinker, I'm a write it down, I'm a make sure the calculation is correct type person. And so sometimes working it out that way too, it's a combination of both. Get input and then, write it out and say, if this happens, then X, right? And hopefully X is your goal or your, wherever you're calling the elevated performance, but making sure that it correlates as well. If you can say, hey, if they do all of this and then it doesn't correlate, like you might want to rethink before you head out with that.
Yeah.
Bad boy.
Again, there is just so much on this topic. Probably do a whole, maybe sometime we should do a whole series on incentive.
Segment. Yeah. So if we think about operationalizing and then creating incentives, I think that there's another piece of it that I've seen across teams, and this might be one that's considered intangible, but kind of creating that culture, that environment, that expectation where the team knows, like, hey, the expectation for performance is a high bar. Like, there is not, like, no mediocrity, like, we don't settle. So creating a culture or an environment that fosters that can ultimately elevate performance, because knowing coming in that you're going to have to be on the top of your game and then continue that, I think is, so I guess culture is kind of a third topic that I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, I think it's as an important a piece as any. The culture that you create within any team is going to have an impact on performance and whether or not you elevate people. And everybody's been part of a bad team or been with a bad leader or had something that's, bad within the culture. A simple example would be, Johnny's late every day and nobody does anything about it or says it and comes in 15, 20 minutes. There's no consequence. But I'm here every single day. We've created a culture where we're allowing one person to do something that the rest of the team can't do. All of a sudden I show up late and someone's saying something to me. Like, that's an example of bad culture. And then when you're looking at how you create a good culture or a great culture, there's so many pieces that go into it. But that consistency, again, for me is going to be on top of the list. What you do every day needs to be done every week, every month, every year, so people know what to expect. And you have to be able to do that with respect, engage, make people feel valued. It's not you just dictating what the culture is going to be. It has to be everybody, all inclusive.
Yeah, you have to be about it. One of our previous guests, Rashad, how did he say it? What did he say? What you accept today, you expect tomorrow. And it's completely true. Like you said, if low performance is okay, or if you bring in people and you don't set any type of expectation, it automatically starts to create the culture, the environment where that's going to be acceptable. So I think it starts from the beginning, at the time of hire, and then all throughout, consistency, like you said. And then I think as far as elevating performance, one of my favorite sayings, and I'm hoping that it correlates, is if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And
without a doubt.
So maybe, and that's interchangeable, right? Maybe not the smartest, but if you're the hardest worker in the room, maybe, go somewhere where people outwork you. So I think that mindset is something that I have always had, is like, the expectation is I'm going to be pushed and that it's going to be hard and that I need to elevate my performance to get to the next level. It's not going to be easy or just a walk in the park or cakewalk or whatever that say. I don't know what the saying is, but something like that, right? Like, that's the idea. And if you have that mindset across your team, you have people that are like, the normal is to elevate performance. It's not something that you're stretching for.
Yeah. And people are watching you. They're watching you as a leader. So if you're putting in a half a day, or if your projects are not coming in on time, or you're not going through and doing the same things that you're asking of other people, don't go then say, I need 150% out of you, which, by the way, I know is impossible. You can't get above 100%. But don't go expect more out of other people if you're not delivering. And oftentimes that's what you see in leaders, right? They've gotten to this spot for whatever the case may be, and they can give a great speech. They can be inspired in a meeting, and then they're taken off at 2:00 because whatever it is, they have to be somewhere else. And we all know we have things to do, but maybe it's 3-4 days a week while the employees are there working. It's like, no.
Yeah.
So, creating that culture where there's high expectations, it's from the top up. We as leaders have to be able to be those role models.
Look across the last couple episodes, or whatever you want to call in this little 3-part series that we have. I think all of these individual pieces that we're recommending, starting at the individual, right? Finding people's potential, having the conversation about how they can grow, going into teams. These are all, having a vision, setting the goals. Like, these are all little things that also build your culture. So it's almost like this is embedded across the entire thing. And if you can do all of it right, those are steps towards being a great leader. And in my journey, I've been across where maybe I'm doing really good at like all, 6 things. And then sometimes I'm not doing great in one area and I have to come back and say, okay, you're not being clear with your vision, or, hey, your goals were not aligned, or whatever it is. So I think to the point of setting examples, being an example, it's leaders that are doing all of these little things. And while you're learning or you're reevaluating or you're new and growing, you might take these things one at a time and become really good at it, but the goal would be to get good across the board. That is a well-rounded leader, I think, and kind of lends to that. That way the culture is just, it is what it is, right? Like it's a product of everything that you've been doing, and I think that's a huge testament to the type of leader you are.
Yeah, you have to do all the things, and you have to do them every day. It is a lot of work to create an incredible culture. So I'm loving all of these conversations. So
in performance, real quick on that. So I always said that the true testament or ability of your team is what happens when you're not there. So when the leader's there, right, people can be on their best behavior and things can be managed in a way where it's okay, everything's running, whatever, but your leader's out for, PTO or something, or we've had leaders that go out on leave, and watching if their team falls apart or if they stay together and or rise to the occasion, I think is just awesome to see. Like that's what you want, is when you remove yourself, can they operate at the standard that you've set, elevated, even when you're not there?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm blessed to have an incredible team. I know I could take a little bit of time off.
You're the best team ever.
and the team would step up and perform. So completely agree. Let's talk about action items. What action items are you taking here?
For me, I know we have a couple, but I think for me it would be to make sure that you're clear in your expectations. One thing that, and it's not always if you're hiring, just recently, like top of mind, I think is when I've been doing interviews. And so setting the expectation from the very beginning. So I would just say, ask yourself, what is my culture? Like do an analysis of your culture and hey, what's, what's going on? Have I set the right expectations? Am I bringing people in and then carrying on throughout in a consistent way?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. Do an analysis. Do a SWOT analysis. So you can Google it.
I knew it was in there somewhere. That must be what I was thinking.
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this applies, it's a lot of work, but if you're able to put it in those, into that format, and you look across your team, whether it's in an employee, you're looking at your team, you're looking at culture, performance, all of it together. Understand what your strengths are. Lean into those. Understand what your weaknesses are and start to develop those. What are the opportunities that you can go after? And then what are the threats? Like this is a way that you can look at and really have a good understanding. It's self-reflection for your teams and your culture and everything that we've been talking about. And sometimes that's difficult. And
yourself, it's that big old mirror that you were talking about, right? Is whether it's yourself or your team, you better have it up and
always look in the mirror first. That's usually where the problem starts.
As a leader, for sure, and I take that as my responsibility, right? If I absolutely not, can I blame it on my team or this, that, or the other? Or maybe sometimes there's outside factors, but first thing I'm doing is let me review. I'd rather know it and call it out before anybody calls me out on it. So
I agree.
Review first.
So Natasha, we're coming to the end of this 3-part series. This has been, I really love the conversation we've had on this. I hope you have as well. We have gotten really, really good feedback and more engagement than I was expecting, because we're kind of switching it up from the Tell Us Your Story, which will be back. But thank you for spending 3 days with you and I jabbering about it.
Of course, and I hope that everyone listening is really take some time. Like I said, I think in the last episode is that you have to take some time. It's not just something that you listen and do, and it's taken me a long time to know that there is work to be put in. Give it a try. It might seem really, just simple sometimes. Oh, am I really going to write this down? Yes, absolutely write it down. You hear it all the time. So really encourage people to go back through, listen again, tell us how it's working. Love to hear the feedback. So kind of to summarize performance, right? Elevating performance, couple things is one, operationalize or standardize the process. You're going to create consistency that way, and you're going to give them the tools to elevate their performance. Next up is incentivize. Know what will incentivize your team, bring them in and make sure that they're a part of that so that it can lend to productive, outcomes. And then culture. Make sure your expectations are aligned and across the board and clear, and take some time to do an analysis on that and look and see if what you are expecting is happening, and if it's not, what can you do about it?
Yeah, the last thing I'll say on it, you could take everything we talked about today, the last 2 episodes, you can go and apply them, and guess what? You're not going to have the best team in the world. You're not going to be the best leader in the world. These are pieces to the puzzle that you have to put the work in and day out. Doing that over time, you're going to create an excellent team, excellent people, great culture. So again, just appreciate the conversation and the feedback. For those that are listening, you can also follow on LinkedIn at Tell Us Your Story, where, as we go through our weeks, we're putting through the themes and we're putting our thoughts out there for engagement and people to give us feedback, where people are giving us thoughts they want us to see out there. I'm always happy to go out there and put those out there as well. So appreciate all the support. I think we're going back to Tell Us Your Story after this episode, but we're going to do this every couple months. This is fun.
Yep, keep listening. I will close us out then. All right, Grandpa The Millennial, out.